Welcome back to Comic Krackle. I'm your host Kirby, and today you're watching Motherbox News, your trusted source from the source. Today we're going to be talking about The New Gods Issue 5 by Ram V Evan Cagle and Andrew McLean. Before we jump into this issue, let's cut to one of our community questions asked by Brian Rehill, who says, within Ram's own interpretation of the fourth world, can new gods be created by empowering other DC characters with the source? Like in the Darkseid war, with different heroes becoming quote-unquote gods in their own right. Were they really gods like the new gods, or just pumped up with the source? And with that, are there any characters he enjoyed working in with fourth world characters that aren't typically associated with them? Maybe an example being Superman or other Kryptonians working for Darkseid, like in Superman the Animated Series, because of their abilities. Thanks for the question, Brian. And now, I'm gonna let Ram V speak for himself. Ram?
See, this is a complicated question to answer because the way I see powers and how they work within the context of the fourth world or the DCU is I'm not so literal when it comes to my interpretation of powers and where they come from and how characters gain their powers, if you will. I think there's always, and there should always be, an element of the nebulous, an element of the unexplained. If you kind of explain and codify everything, then, what's the difference between that and playing with toys? That being said, I would say that on some level, it's not just being endowed by the source, because the way I've interpreted the source for the fourth world is that the source has some measure of sentience in itself. And so there is an element of that being kind of infused with greater purpose, greater intelligence, which I think is a reflection of how Kirby used the source in when he first turned Isaiah into Highfather. And so, yes, there's the obvious sort of endowment of powers to a character, but I think for me, the more important question is, can I endow a character with greater purpose, with greater knowledge in some ways? So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm generally quite iffy about talking about characters and power sets in these kind of very literal terms. And to answer the second part of the question, yeah, I think, very much at the heart of this story is the idea that the Justice League and the New Gods will now work together to their own ends, also to common objectives. And so there are a lot of characters that I'm enjoying working with that wouldn't otherwise be associated or only have a tangential association to the fourth world. For instance, Mr. Terrific appears in one of the future issues. There's some Miss Martian stuff going on. And then obviously there are characters from the Green Lantern Corps, more unexpected ones that you could see. And even within the fourth world, the bugs, I think, are maybe an underutilized force. And I have my own distinct ideas on how to use them in the story. And I think we'll see more of that going forward.
Thanks, Ram. And now, back to the issue. It starts off with Lightray seemingly as a child asking Highfather what happens when new gods die. Highfather responds that all new gods, when they die, return to the source, because that's where they came from. In the next sequence, Lightray is with Metron, being sent by Highfather, now a little bit older, and told to watch this planet that's at the end of extinction. He asks Metron why he thinks that Highfather sent him there, with Metron stating, it was a planet that lived, fought, copulated, tried to save itself, but resigned to its doom in the end. I suspect it has something to do with teaching you the ethereal nature of life and hope. Lightray then asks the same question to Metron, with him replying, from where I am sitting, Lightray, we are all information expressed and perceived. So in death, we are only information transformed. Life may be ephemeral, but information is immortal. In the next page, it shows Lightray with his best friend Orion, with him asking a similar question. This is when Orion responds, nothing. Nothing happens when they die. They are dead. That is the whole point of it, is it not? I make them dead. I make them nothing. If what you really want is to speak of the tall shadow standing in the dark, I have seen him too. How could I not? The Black Racer, a god of nothing, utterly meaningless. And in the end, nothingness comes for us all. The last moment shows Lightray alongside the Black Racer, with them having that conversation, and Lightray once again asking what happens when the new gods die. This is when Black Racer responds, "Yes, young Solace, god of hope and joy, you have watched and you have wondered. I will tell you the answer one day, but you have to earn it. And so, first, a contest. I hear you are fast. Each time you and I meet, you will run and I will chase. And because these actions are expressions of who we really are, we will play to win. The day I catch you, young Solace, that day you will have your answer." So there's a lot to touch on just on these 4 pages, and I've been thinking about it to ad nauseum. Not a lot of people have the same appreciation that I do for Lightray, not only because, in my headcanon, he's in a relationship with Orion, but on top of that, he's a god of hope and joy. I mean, it's literally the text, it's not in the subtext. When he was first introduced in The New Gods by Jack Kirby, it's shown that he's relatively young and naive. He's a god that's not fit for war, and that's why Orion is sent out by Highfather. Lightray is the forever optimist, but that's why it works for him. So when you have these 4-page sequences of having the god of just about optimism asking what happens when they die, it provides for multiple instances of getting into each character's mind, as well as seeing how Lightray sees these people. Highfather gives vague platitudes. Metron is very matter-of-fact. Orion doesn't see the importance of death, and the Black Racer is a looming presence for all of the new gods. Now, obviously, this is foreshadowing what happens later in this issue, spoilers. I think that these 4 pages alone are just as good as Jack Kirby's original series, as well as Walt Simonson's Orion run that I read recently. Shout out JoJo. Something that I see even better about these pages is the way that they're rendered. Andrew MacLean completely blew me away. His pencils in these pages are shockingly complex. It almost makes me think of like an animated series for the New Gods. And by the way, Jimmy Guns, if you're listening, please greenlight that. But you see this complexity once you zoom into the pages a little bit, and you see that it's not just flat coloring, but there's like a texture in that coloring that really makes these pencils pop. It's a technique that I would not be surprised if Jack Kirby, if he was still alive today, would be utilizing. If you look at The Hunger Dogs, which is Jack Kirby's return to the New Gods, and an out-of-continuity ending to them, he utilized a different coloring practice and adapted with the times. This is the next evolution of those coloring decisions on Jack Kirby's pencils. Every character in these scenes perfectly encapsulates who they are, but also sells the performance of each character. But that last page showcasing the discussion between Lightray and the Black Racer is just brilliant. Not only do you see the Black Racer's costume start adopting more of those cosmos as the conversation goes on, but then in the last panel, showcasing Black Racer being all encompassed in negative space. It's beautiful and it's inventive, and this alone sold me on reading Headlopper by Andrew MacLean over at Image Comics. Moving into the actual events of the issue, we open with Lightray being called back once Highfather goes into the battlefield, picking up from The New Gods issue 4, which I don't know if you know, but I did cover it last time. Not only is Highfather entering the battlefield, but also all of the forces that are on New Genesis are called back, and we finally see what the true powers of Akala are. She basically gets to open these gateways, kind of like how a mother box does, and transport the people out of the battlefield. We don't know how far she can transport them, but it is pretty cool. And on top of that, if you zoom into this page, you see cameos for pre-existing New Gods characters, as well as ones that I'm not 100% familiar with, and I think that they're just created for this scene. You know, it kind of gets me thinking, I could be put into the book as one of the New Gods. Ram, if you're watching, It'd be pretty cool. Anyways, once called back, Lightray is summoned by Metron and asks him for a word. This is when we cut back to the battlefield with Highfather standing up against Karok Ator's army, as well as him leading the charge, when they have a very important conversation. Highfather states, "I do not know who you are, or why you have attacked this garden of peace. There was a time I would have answered with unimaginable wrath, but I've come only to ask you to leave."
And there it is, the hubris of one who calls himself a god. I have seen it before. When Darkseid once laid waste to my world, he too thought himself a god. Look at where he is now.
Karok establishes to Highfather that they're the Niktari. They're the ones that deal in the dark when the gods are all gone. And that's when he gives Highfather an ultimatum: convert or be conquered. And because Highfather keeps that thing on him, he just points his staff at them and they all seemingly disintegrate in one of the greatest pages that is shown by Evan Cagle. And I'm hitting my quota at least twice in this specific issue, because not only are they destroyed, but also they reanimate, and both of these scenes are absolutely magical. And this is when Karok states,
"When my world was left in ruins, I too began a journey to seek the means of my salvation. At the end of my search, Isaiah, I found darkness. The darkness that runs through my veins is far older than the power you wield. I denounce your newfound salvation. Your powers hold no sway over me. Come, Niktari, the time of gods is ended, and this war has just begun."
Now this scene is deeply important to establishing the background for this antagonist for the entirety of the series. It's only 2 panels, but it establishes that Karok Ator's entire world was decimated by Darkseid. This is the first time that we've seen Darkseid in this series, and let me tell you, I was excited to see what Evan Cagle did, and I was not disappointed. The way that this works for his background is an allusion to colonialism, specifically with the English and the imperialistic colonialism of going to native peoples and stating the same thing: convert to our religion or die. And the illusion of this kind of makes me see the entirety of his point. It doesn't matter if the new gods come from Apocalypse or New Genesis, both of them are Sourceborn. They're going to hate the people that colonialized their world and destroyed it so they cannot return. If you remember the end of the last issue, all of the new gods basically had the training wheels taken off of them. So as Orion is pursuing, trying to get this child, all of their powers are completely out of whack due to the god surge. When Kamal's powers are finally completely recharged, he strikes Orion with this very powerful concussive blast that sends him shooting back. Scott and Barda are trying to stay out of the way of Orion, as well as looking out for one another, when Orion gets back up and states, "I had forgotten what it felt like to truly take a hit. I knew there was a reason Highfather sent me after him. A threat worthy of my talents, Scott. It's been so long since I've fought without holding back." And let me tell you, yeah, it is pretty terrifying to see Orion like that, but it does beg a couple of questions. Is somehow the god surge and this leveling up of each and every one of the new gods mentally inhibiting Orion deciding between right and wrong? Now that he has more power, is he unable to be blinded by the fury? Well, spoilers, at the end of this issue, he does not keep his chill. And while we're talking about characterizations, we have another community question asked by Finest Soup, who says, Kirby famously based Scott and Barda on his relationship with his wife Roz. Has V drawn on any of his relationships when writing Scott and Barda? Did Cagle draw on any specific real-life figures when designing the faces of any of these characters? Thank you for the question. And now, Ram V. Ram?
I don't know that I can point to any one particular relationship as the basis for how I write Scott and Barda. Obviously, as a writer, the whole point of drawing from experiences is that you draw from an amalgam of experiences. I've been in relationships where I could certainly see moments of how I write Scott and Barda being reflected in those. The kind of quiet pillar of strength that Barda can tend to be to Scott's more neurotic, slightly more self-aware, frantic decision making. Equally, the need for within Barda to see Scott kind of fulfill his own potential and the support she gives him when he falters and when he needs it. I think, a lot of that comes from my own relationships as well. As a writer, I tend to draw from my own experiences a lot of the time, because I think really what's the point if you don't have that level of authenticity when you're writing something? But I don't know that I can point a finger at any one particular relationship and say, yeah, this is a person I based it off of.
Thanks, Ram. Now back to the issue. We then cut back to the issue with Karok Ator facing off with Highfather. And let me tell you that old man is agile. He's like a cat. It doesn't matter how many blows that Highfather is able to land, Karok Ator just reconstitutes. It's like a zero-sum gain at this point. We witness as his forces are just destroying the landscape of New Genesis. And that's when he says,
"Apt, don't you think? You should know this better than most, Isaiah. Old Huss must die. Though let it not be said that Karok Ator is a humorless being. I am not without a sense of poetry. I will leave behind a steward here to oversee the ransacking of New Genesis. He will sit on your throne while we dismantle your dream. We found him in dead space, floating in the detritus of some lost world. The bastard son of Darkseid, now a Niktari, endowed with power. He will have the honor of delivering the final blow."
Okay, because Kirby forgot to introduce me, hi. I'm Kirby, lore correspondent, and today we're gonna talk about Graven. I'm not gonna lie, Graven sucks, and let me tell you why. Graven is the worst example of another son of Darkseid that is also a bastard. We didn't really need a Graven. We already have the duality between Orion and Kalibak. You see, Kalibak was the first son of Darkseid, and he was the son that Darkseid had with his wife that he chose out of love. Once he rose up the ranks, his mother, Hegra, stated that Darkseid could not be with this woman and he had to be with somebody that she hand-selected. So basically an arranged marriage. Hegra then called for the execution of the woman that Darkseid loved, being Kalibak's mom. She then arranged Darkseid to be in a relationship with Tigra, and them together had Orion. Darkseid had no feelings for Tigra, so casted off Orion at the first opportunity, which is the Pact. Orion goes over to New Genesis and is raised by Highfather as a son of his own, while Darkseid takes on scot-free and basically just puts him in a contraption the entire time. These two sons balance out the duality of Darkseid and what he is capable of loving. So having Graven doesn't make any sense to me. Graven was created by Ron Mars and Daryl Banks, and he first appeared in Green Lantern issue number 74. Really, Graven is a Green Lantern character, most affiliated with John Stewart and Kyle Rayner. I personally think that it was because Ron Mars wasn't able to use Darkseid or even Kalibak during that time, so he had to come up with a new bastard son of Darkseid. He was predominantly only used in Green Lantern comics, but he was killed off in the pre-New 52 era within the series Outsiders 5 of a Kind. He wasn't reintroduced to modern continuity until Grant Morrison's The Green Lantern, which came out in 2019. And knowing the affinity that Ram V has for Morrison, that makes a whole lot of sense. So anyways, I've been your lore correspondent. I hate Graven, and now back to Kirby with the rest of the issue. And this is when he shoots his version of the Omega Sanction at Highfather, and then it's quickly blocked by Lightray. And that's my boy. That's my MVP. Let's go, Lightray. They then start beginning to battle, with each one deflecting the offensive measures of the other, and Highfather pleading to get back into the battle and save Lightray, when he is then pulled back by Akala and Metron. And this is when Metron says to him, "Lightray knows of his fate. I made sure to tell him, and he accepts it willingly. You will do him the honor of trusting him and being the leader your people need right now." And then we cut to Lightray as he's stabbed in the stomach by Karok Ator and seemingly dies. Highfather, now ashamed of the death of somebody that he holds so close, tells Metron that he cannot take his people anywhere. New Genesis has fallen. Where does Metron expect Highfather to bring the new gods to? And that's when Metron says that they need to go to Earth. And maybe that's what the source was telling them in the prophecy. And this immediately gets Highfather thinking about the prophecy, which then makes him think about his two sons, Orion and Scott Free. Once we cut back to the two brothers, Scott makes a stand against Orion, stating that if he wants Kamal, he's gonna have to go through him. And Orion basically says, "All right, bet." And he throws a punch so hard that it would dismantle Scott Free. But thankfully, Superman appears and stops that fist. And that is the cliffhanger for issue number 5. And I am just completely blown away by the level of artistry that has been throughout the entirety of this series up to this point. But let me tell you, the last page reveal just made me want to play an air guitar, because I was just so hyped off of it, and I had to reread the entirety of this issue multiple times. So if you, like me, are excited for The New Gods number 6, don't forget to pick it up May 21st. And as always, trust the source.